going to be reading from Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 37. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an evil spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." "Yes, Lord," she replied, "but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee, and into the region of Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means "be opened." At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. "He has done everything well," they said. "He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." The word of God for everyone. Thanks be to God.
May we be in a moment of prayer together. Now may the words of my lips and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Picture this scene with the woman in the Syro-Phoenician country, known as the Syro-Phoenician woman. Jesus and her come face to face. He's gone there, doesn't want anybody to see him, it appears. And she comes, and she says to him, "Have mercy on me, O Lord. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil." And Jesus makes no response in the beginning. You know, when they would say that somebody was vexed with the devil, or a demon, as they oftentimes said that often was a psychological condition that the person was in. Might have been deep depression. Might have been that this daughter always had kind of a dark cloud over her head, that she never was quite right in that way. And Jesus is silent when this woman makes this plea. I'm stunned by that silence. It isn't like him. He was silent, to be sure, when he stood before Pilate, when he stood before Herod, when he knew his death was coming, or his destiny was being unfolded. He was silent in those on that day. But it's not like him to be silent before human need, and here he is. And The woman was a Gentile, or a Greek, but a Gentile. And Jesus was a Jew. And there was a long historical separation between these people. The Jews didn't like the Gentiles, and the Gentiles didn't like the Jews. And there was this hostility between them. And hostility is something that's part of our human nature, unfortunately, between peoples. When I visited Ireland a few years ago, we weren't in Northern Ireland, but when I remember so well the Protestants and Catholics and the hostility there that was so deep-rooted in our own country between blacks and whites and across the world, one group and another, economic groups, a lot of hostility, and a lot of it expressed in different ways. We don't know why Jesus was silent in the beginning, but whatever it was, it may have had to do with that deep-seated hostility that was there, that he was brought up in. But looking at these people again, Jesus a Jew, or an Israelite, and the woman a Gentile, and they're not, they're looking at one another, and she comes to him begging for her child. She wants healing. She wants him to be healed. They were in the region of Tyre and Sidon, not too far from where Jesus grew up. It was more than a stone's throw, but it was walkable distance for him to walk over into Gentile territory. We don't know why he went. We can only speculate. He may have gone there to just get away from the crowds. It was hard for Jesus to find time for himself. It may have been that his life was in danger, that the Romans were beginning to press on him. We know they wanted to entrap him in different ways. And so he may have gone to get away from the authorities, because the Romans had no rule in the Gentile territory at that time. But whatever it was, he's over there, and she comes, and she asks for healing. And we don't know what went on in Jesus' mind, do we? Was he thinking, well, you're a Gentile, and I'm a Jew, and I came to save the Jewish people. I came to save them. I didn't come to save you. I came to save. Later on, he comes to save the world, and then the message was that Jesus came to save the Jews. We don't know what it was. He may have said, I'm sent to my own people. God chose them to save the world, and he chose me to save them. Perhaps I'd better concentrate on them. There's going to be enough need there. These are only guesses, but they might well have gone through his head. Before she finally, he says, and he breaks the silence, and he says to her, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, of the house of Israel. How could he have said that? Here, this girl is filled with a demon, suffering. I was only sent to the lost house of Israel. That doesn't sound like Jesus, does it? Not what you would expect from his lips. And then she responds. She didn't attack him. She was asking for help. And then Jesus says, it's not fair to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. That's probably the most difficult statement in the Gospels that comes out of the lips of Jesus. He's calling her a dog. Now, today, we love our dogs, right? Generally. Unless they bite you and then, But the term today would be, I wouldn't give it to a rat. Would be more like it. It was a derogatory term that the Jews used of the Gentiles. I wouldn't give it to a nigger. We use that, don't we, in our country? I wouldn't give it to a spink. It was a derogatory term. And the scholars say, a Gentile scholar says that was a common thing for the Jews to call the Gentiles of that day. They were dogs. The Jewish scholar says, a noted Jewish scholar said they occasionally used it. Well, you have to know who the one is that said it. And Jesus says this to her. And that's a hard thing to hear. We might pause just long enough to think how name calling is used as a way of expressing hostility. And we have a lot of it in the world. Kids are victims of it constantly. Political parties use it. Nationalities use it. You and I were brought up. Maybe not to call names, but we were brought up in a culture that uses names. French Canadian was the term used in northern Vermont to categorize a certain group of people. Hostility comes through calling names, name calling. We wonder whether Jesus would really stoop to that kind. And why would he? Why would he call this woman a dog? That's a hard one. There was just really strong tensions between the Jews and the Gentiles. It's right up to this day. If somebody takes the side of the Palestinians in an argument, they're accused of being anti-Jewish. If they take the Jewish side, they're accused of being anti-Palestinian. And this tension is there. And that day, Jesus grew up with that. And the important thing to say is, in the woman, I love her response. She's quick. She says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." And that was too much for Jesus. And he says, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you even as you will." And her daughter was healed. Now, a lot of people have, some scholars, and I've read sermons on this text, and some people say, well, Jesus was just fooling when he said, "Oh, you're a dog." I don't think so, but that's the way they kind of, or slough him off. Jesus wouldn't have meant that. It must be a mistranslation. It was put in by somebody. I would like to suggest to you that a better picture of Jesus is what Luke says about Jesus shortly after he was born, that he grew in wisdom and in stature with God. That Jesus was a true human being like you and I. He was not exempt from the culture of his day or anything else. That he was shackled by it in the same way as we are. Theodore Ferris preached a sermon in 1969. I had a stack of his old sermons. And when I came across this text this week, I had no idea where the stack of old sermons were. And I said, I remember that he preached on this text many moons ago. Because I'd used it once as a reference. So I start thumbing through these sermons. And I come across it. And I remembered most of the things in the sermon. It's amazing how I can't remember where my keys are in the morning, but I can remember something that I read in 1973 about this Syrophoenician woman. But he has this statement in his sermon, which I underline. He said, we can paint a picture of Jesus as, that this was just, that he really didn't mean this. And we have our idealized version of who Jesus is. And I certainly do. But he said there is a better picture of Jesus, of a man growing up into the stature of a mature human being, wrapped as everyone is in the swaddling clothes of his people's past. Both their prejudices and their principles, their greatness and their weakness. Gradually you can see him wriggling out of these swaddling clothes, working himself finally free of them. By birth, he was predisposed to treat Gentiles as outsiders. The Gentile woman was an outsider, and he finally came to see the Gentile in need to be the same as any other human being in need. He grew in stature, and growth is a painful process. That, to me, is a much more realistic picture of Jesus, Ferris writes, and it is to me. I want to underline that statement. He finally came to see the Gentile in need to be the same as any other human being in need. He grew in stature and growth, and that's a painful process. That to me is a much more realistic picture of Jesus. It also says something about ourselves, doesn't it? Some of us don't like certain people. Some of us, if someone says, a Democratic says something, we shut off. Or a Republican says something, we shut off. Or a black person says something, we shut off. If Colin Kaepernick says something, we shut off. And can we shed those swaddling clothes that we were brought up in? Or not? Can we ourselves grow in wisdom and in stature with God? Ferris goes on later in the sermon and he says, I want to say how deep these hostilities are that some of us were. And he wrote this back in the 60s. Yeah, 69 was when he preached this. I can remember the time not long ago when I was looking at television. There was a CBS newscast. The next man to speak was in Washington, and he was a black man. Instinctively, for a moment, I shrank Then I listened. He was intelligent, competent, and he spoke well. I was proud that he was speaking to us, but that old inherited hostility was in me. It flared for an instant, just long enough to warn me of its presence. I've talked with a lot of people in the military over the years who were kind of pushed together, black and white. And they came to, they said for them it was a growth experience because they'd always been kept at arm's length apart. This is an interesting text. It's a difficult passage, but I think it captures something that all of us have to go through from time to time, is we do need to shed the swaddling cloths that we are wrapped up in. Our prejudices, our ways of looking at certain people, and to become free to the point where whenever we see anybody and we see them in need,